They told you your voice didn't matter, maybe not with words. They're slicker than that, maybe with silence, maybe with a test score, maybe with the way they looked through you when you raised your hand, or when they rolled their eyes while you tried to speak your truth. Maybe with 1,000 little nudges to keep quiet, to stay small, to conform. But you know what? The world doesn't get changed by people who play it small. The world changes when one person decides that silence is no longer an option. They told you your voice didn't matter, and maybe they never said it outright, but they made you believe it. They trained you to believe it. Not with fists, but with silence, with systems that reward obedience more than originality, with classrooms where speaking out gets you labeled a problem, with workplaces where raising your hand too often gets you pushed out of the room, with a culture that says your worth is based on how well you fit in, not how honestly you speak out, and you internalized that we all did. At some point, we started to wonder if maybe our voice really didn't count, if maybe we needed to sound like them, think like them, be like them to ever be heard. But that's the lie, that's the trick. The truth is, your voice has power asterisk, not asterisk in spite of its differences, but asterisk because asterisk of them. You don't need to be perfect to be powerful. That's the myth that keeps too many people quiet for too long. You don't need a polished speech. You don't need fancy degrees or the approval of people in suits who have never lived your experience. You don't need to have all the answers. You just need to show up real. Because your story, raw, unfinished, full of contradictions, is the one someone out there needs to hear. Movements don't begin with experts, they begin with truth tellers. With people who are willing to stand in their messy humanity and say, "This is what I see, this is what I feel, this is what I refuse to accept anymore." There is something magnetic about someone who owns their voice. Something unshakable, because the world is full of noise, people talking to impress, to sell, to distract, but not nearly enough people speaking from the gut. When you use your voice from that deep, honest place, people notice. They may not clap, they may not agree, but they feel it, and that feeling, that shift in the air, is how change begins. That's how walls start to crack. It doesn't take a crowd. It doesn't take a megaphone. It just takes one person who refuses to stay silent one more day. One person who says, "I may be scared, but I'm speaking anyway." That's the power of one voice. That's the beginning of something unstoppable. Movements don't begin with fanfare. They don't start on stages or in headlines. They begin in the quiet moments, behind closed doors, in whispered conversations, in late-night thoughts that refuse to be silenced. They begin when someone, maybe you, feels a weight pressing on their chest and finally says enough. That's the birthplace of every revolution, not in spectacle, but in sincerity. One person daring to tell the truth, not because anyone asked them to, but because they couldn't carry the silence any longer. That's how it starts, always. You don't need 1,000,000 followers. You don't need a campaign team or a marketing plan. Movements grow from the ground up, not the top down. They live in the cracks of the everyday. In the text you send to a friend saying, "I'm not okay with this anymore." In the story you share that someone else thought they were alone in carrying. That's how it builds, one voice touching another, sparking another, until a fire starts to spread. And even when it's small, it's still a movement. A small fire still burns. A small truth still breaks chains. What holds most people back isn't the lack of ability. It's the myth that they're not big enough to make a difference, that what they say won't matter unless it reaches the masses. But that's not how change works. Change is intimate, it's local, it's personal. It starts when you choose to stand in your truth and trust that someone else is waiting to hear it. It starts when you tell the story you were taught to hide. When you challenge the rule that was never fair to begin with. When you speak up in a room that's gone too quiet. One person speaking their truth gives others permission to do the same. That's the chain reaction. That's how the walls come down, not with a bang, but with 100 brave whispers. You don't have to be loud to be heard. You just have to be honest. You just have to believe that what you've lived through matters enough to say out loud. Because someone else is waiting for someone like you to go first, waiting to see that it's possible, waiting for proof that change begins exactly where they are, with one voice, one story, one moment of courage. And that voice could be yours. When you finally decide to use your voice, you'll meet resistance. That's not a possibility. It's a guarantee. The moment you stop nodding along and start speaking your truth, some people will flinch. Some will get angry. Some will walk away, not because your voice is wrong, but because it disrupts the version of reality they've grown comfortable with. That's what truth does. It doesn't sit quietly in the corner. It doesn't make everyone feel safe. It shows up and shakes the room, and some rooms need shaking. You'll be called too emotional, too radical, too loud. They'll say you're making things up, overreacting, creating drama. They'll tell you to calm down, to be reasonable, to think about your tone. That's how systems protect themselves, by trying to convince the people who threaten them that they're the problem. But you're not the problem. Your discomfort is not a liability. It's a compass. It's a signal that you're brushing up against something real, something raw, something that's been kept in the dark for too long. And people don't like being dragged into the light, even when the truth is staring them in the face. But don't let that resistance fool you into silence. Don't let it gaslight you into thinking your voice doesn't matter. In fact, the resistance is proof that it does, because if your voice had no power, no one would try to shut it down. If your truth didn't matter, no one would feel threatened by it. When they push back, when they try to minimize your experience, that's when you double down, not because you owe anyone an explanation, but because you owe yourself the dignity of being heard. Courage isn't the absence of fear. Courage is speaking anyway, and the more you use your voice, the stronger it gets. You build it like a muscle. Every time you refuse to back down, you reclaim a piece of yourself. Every time you tell the truth, even when it shakes in your throat, you teach someone else that they can do the same. Resistance isn't the end of the road. It's the beginning. It's the sign you're in the right place. Not the easy place, not the comfortable place, but the place where change actually starts. So don't be afraid of the pushback. Be afraid of what happens if you never speak at all. When one person uses their voice, it creates space for others to do the same. That's how movements grow, not through a single, explosive moment, but through a ripple that moves from one soul to another. One person stands up, speaks their truth, and suddenly someone else feels just a little bit braver. They see themselves in that voice. They feel seen in that story. They realize they're not alone. And for the first time, maybe ever, they believe their voice might matter too. That's the power of going first. It's not about being the loudest in the room. It's about being willing to be vulnerable when everyone else is still hiding. It's about telling the truth when everyone else is still pretending. You might think no one's listening. You might think your story isn't big enough or important enough, but someone is always listening. Someone is always watching, waiting, wondering if it's safe to speak. When you show up with your voice, you don't just tell your story, you open a door. And once that door is open, it's hard to close. Your voice has the power to create belonging. It has the power to say, you are not crazy, you are not the only one, you are not broken. And when someone hears that message, something starts to shift. They start to believe that maybe, just maybe, their pain is not their fault, that their difference is not a flaw, that their experience deserves a voice. That's how liberation begins. One person stands up and speaks, and someone else realizes they can too. This is how every movement is born, not with leaders who have all the answers, but with ordinary people who dare to speak honestly, with people who use their voice not to command attention, but to invite connection. Not to dominate, but to liberate. When you speak from that place, raw, imperfect, unfiltered, you make space for others to be real too. You give them permission to show up, not as the version of themselves the world expects, but as who they truly are. So don't underestimate the impact of one voice. Your voice. It doesn't need to echo through stadiums to start a movement. It just needs to reach one heart, because that's all it takes. One voice to inspire another, one spark to light a fire, one truth to start a revolution. So here you are, holding something more powerful than you may have ever realized. Your voice, not a perfect voice, not a voice wrapped in applause or smoothed out by approval, but a voice that carries your truth, your scars, your story, your hope. A voice that wasn't given to you just to survive, but to shape, to shake, to start something. And now you know, you don't have to wait for a stage to speak. You don't have to wait for an audience to matter. You don't have to wait until you're fearless to be heard. Movements don't start with crowds. They start with a choice, one voice choosing honesty over silence. Courage over comfort, truth over approval. You are that voice, you are that choice. And whether you whisper it, write it, sing it, shout it, or speak it through tears, let it be heard, because your voice could be the crack in the silence. Your truth could be the spark that starts the fire, and someone out there is waiting to follow your lead, to find their strength in your words, to find their freedom in your bravery. One voice can start a movement, and that voice is yours.